Streaming now, this is the Wood TV Live Desk.
Storm Teammates winter weather outlook goes live on woodtv.com tomorrow afternoon. As we prepare, folks, we take a look back with Chief Meteorologist Emeritus Bill Steffen at some of the biggest winter storms to hit West Michigan here. I'm News 8 digital anchor Luke Laster here from the Wood TV Live Desk. Bill, good morning.
Thank you. And I tell you what, this is a great time of year. We're looking ahead toward winter. A lot of folks love winter weather around here, and we're going to see a bunch of it here over the next several months.
Let's dive right in here. Let's go first to the blizzard of January 26, 1978. We have the typewriter here.
Isn't that amazing? That's a type forecast that I actually produced. I remember typing it at home on an old Royal typewriter back in 1978. This was the January 26 blizzard of 78, and if you are over 50 years old, I bet you remember this storm. It was probably the most impactful storm, certainly the most impactful winter storm that we have ever had here in West Michigan. This storm actually backed up from the southeast. The center of the low pressure was in West Virginia and actually moved to the northwest and wound up over the southern part of Lake Huron. And as it did that, it brought the heavy snow from the south and southeast right up into West Michigan. We had 15 inches of snow in 15 hours. And it was not just the snow, it was the very strong wind that we had around this system. Winds gusted here in West Michigan to 40 to 50 miles an hour. While that blew the snow into humongous drifts, we had drifts of snow. I measured a drift of snow 14 feet high. I stood on that.
Oh, my goodness.
During the blizzard of 78. And one of the good things about that, though, is that the wind blew the snow off the roofs, so we didn't have the roofs collapsing like we sometimes would if we had a wet, heavy snow that stuck to the roofs. So that was a good thing, and it was also kind of a good thing that the snow was kind of dry and powdery, so it was a little easier to shovel than it would be if it was wet and heavy. But this storm was absolutely incredible. Did you know that the expressway from Grand Rapids to Kalamazoo, US 131, it took 5 days to get that expressway open? Wow. Because there were buried cars. There were literally tens of thousands of buried cars and cars that were immovable in southern Michigan and northwest Ohio, northern Indiana. The entire state of Indiana was under a blizzard warning. Not a single county missed out on that. And of course, all of southern Michigan as well for an extended period of time. I remember forecasting 6 to 10 additional inches of snow and thinking, boy, that's the most snow I think I've ever forecast from a system like this. And it just took days to recover from it. We had power outages. Can you imagine being without power for an extended length of time?
And that cold.
Right. And this was not the only snow that we had. After this storm, we had several other storms that produced several inches of snow. This storm was followed by the coldest February that we have ever had and the 5th coldest March. There were snow piles from the January 26th storm that were still here in early April. There were farmers that had to dump their milk because they just couldn't get it to market. Schools were closed. I tell you what, kids, you cheer for a snow day. I tell you what, in this storm, that was the first time I ever went on TV and I said every school was closed. We caught everyone, including the colleges in the area, were all closed too. And part of that was the police saying that we just don't want anybody out there in a situation like this. There were some interesting stories, people that were stranded, and there were literally hundreds of cars that were stranded on expressways here. Strangers took in strangers. You can see, look at the snow piles there.
Yeah.
The snow plows could not get through the drifts, and so what would happen is that they would have to call in a front end loader, and it might take a day to go a block trying to get through these drifts that were 14 feet high. The snow actually came up to the top of the underpass at the door exit on 131. It was all the way up to the top. Goodness. So it was pretty incredible. One of the interesting things about the storm is that it really made my career. This was before cell phones. This was before computers. People had nothing to do in their homes but sit and watch TV, and our ratings were enormous. I was the only meteorologist on the air for a period of time, hours, and so everybody watched Bill Steffen. And I remember after that storm, I would go into Meijer's, the supermarket, and I would have all these people coming up to me to talk about the storm, and they all wanted to tell me their story. You know, in our town,
I can only imagine what you heard.
Yeah, it was absolutely incredible.
Nice.
I was scheduled to go to a conference of TV meteorologists in Savannah, Georgia, and we were also stopping to tell my wife's parents that we were getting married. And so the blizzard came along, and of course I never got there. My wife was snowed in, and it wasn't until the storm came on a Wednesday. It wasn't until the weekend that I actually got there to try and shovel her out so she could get out of her place up by Bostwick Lake.
We have we have a comment here. This one from Michelle saying, "I will never forget snowmobiles were the only ones at the grocery stores."
Yeah, and it was interesting because our news anchor at the time came to work on a snowmobile.
Really?
The only way to get there, and of course he tried to wear a suit. I wore the same. I was at the station I think for 3 days without leaving. And I had no change of clothes, so I was wearing the same clothes.
Suit.
The shirt got a little wrinkly here by Friday, but we managed to get her done. And of course, everybody was interested in the weather that we had. But the blizzard of '78 was an amazing storm. It really was. I can remember I lived at Old Orchard Apartments on the northwest side of town, and I remember people on the second floor jumping off the second floor into the snow pile.
Into the snow?
Young people,
wow,
of course.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that now, but it was amazing. Some schools were closed for up to 2 weeks.
Unreal.
Not just a day, kids, but 2 weeks.
Wow.
Before you could go back. And of course, anybody that could shovel at the time grabbed a shovel and went out. I mean, we had people that would call into the station saying, "Can I get some help?" And we tried to help them as best we could.
Yeah.
In a situation like that, but we had gangs of teenagers that were going around with shovels, shoveling people out so they could get out of their place and get to a store. We had some interesting situations. People, for instance, have to get their drugs, their pharmaceuticals. You know, if you're on a medicine, then you need to get out there and get that done. So we were coordinating with drugstores on that.
Wow.
A lot of folks were without power. There were actually people, mainly in Ohio, that passed away because of hypothermia because there was no heat in their homes. So we were doing all of that, and it's really amazing. I remember how people would come together to help other people, and I think that's something that's not unique to West Michigan, but something that's a stronger value that we have here in West Michigan. The number of people that took in strangers for days, they had no place to go. In order to get them some heat and some food and whatnot.
Let's fast forward to 2011 here. The Groundhog Day.
The Groundhog
blizzard.
Day blizzard. We had 17 inches of snow in Grand Rapids in 2 days. It was similar to the blizzard of '78 in many respects with the amount of snow that we had, the amount of wind that we had. You can see there the yardstick showing the amount of snow and the snow coming down in that particular storm. One nice thing about this storm is it was very well forecast, and I could pat myself on the back on this one a little bit, but it was everybody. The National Weather Service did an amazing job. The Weather Channel and NBC did a great job of covering the storm. It hit the Chicago area just like the other blizzards. Normally when blizzards hit Chicago, they often come up toward our area here as well. But we had the storm so well forecast that everything closed in advance. We had people that actually, got out to the store, got their supplies, and actually prepared to stay inside for several days, which is what happened. After this particular storm, we only had an inch of snow in the next week following the storm, so we had time to clear out. The winds, we had one day where the average wind speed was just 4 miles an hour, so there was no drifting. Once you cleared the snow, it was done. And people really got together. I remember in that storm running into a group of teenagers that were just going from door to door shoveling people out.
Yeah.
And I went, what a great thing to do, looking out for your neighbors and everything else like that. But this storm was another very strong storm. This storm actually broke some windows in downtown Chicago, and I can remember one of the interesting stories. If you know Lakeshore Drive, it's a 3 or 4 lane road in downtown Chicago. There was a bus that slipped on the snow, turned sideways, and wedged itself between the walls perfectly.
Yeah.
So that how do you get it out?
You can't move. Yeah,
you can't get it out. They actually had to call in a couple of these special lifters to actually lift the bus up off the ground and turn it around so they could get it out.
What a process.
Yeah, and I mean, to have a major road like that closed for, a day and a half. Midway Airport was closed for a day and a half. O'Hare Airport was closed for a day and a half. And of course, when a big hub like O'Hare shuts down, that shuts down travel throughout much of the country. So it was a very impactful storm.
And we do have, speaking of burying people out, things like that.
That's
this
Lakeshore
photo
Drive, and
downtown
that was
Chicago.
the blizzard of '67. Now, what was interesting, I was not doing weather on TV back then. My first TV weather show was 1968 as a Boy Scout, believe it or not, at the Scout Fair at New Trier High School in Winnick, Illinois. But this is Lakeshore Drive. Of course, all the cars were buried. Those all had to be dug out before they could plow the road again. Wow. So it took the better part of a day. That storm produced up to 28 inches of snow in the northern suburbs of Chicago. I lived at the time in Wilmette, Illinois, just north of Chicago, and I remember climbing out a second-floor window in order to get out of the house because we couldn't open the doors. The doors opened out. The snow was up to the top of the doors. I remember my poor mother shoveling snow through a window into the basement so that the snow would melt in the basement. We just had so much of it. And one of the interesting things I can remember in this storm is I went to a high school that day, and the blizzard came, and they dismissed everybody around noon. And there was a guy in a convertible with the top down, and he drove in a circle around the high school, and everybody pelted him with snowballs until the car was entirely full of snow, and he was cheering people on to do that. So there were some interesting stories, but that again was another storm where we had a lot of wind with it. As you can see in this picture here, the top of the cars, the snow has blown off the top of the cars, so we did not have the roofs caving in like we might have if it was a wet, heavy snow without much wind. But that was an amazing storm. The blizzard of '67 had some incredible snowfall totals. The heaviest snow fell from about the Kalamazoo area over to Lansing. And here's a look at the weather map from that particular day. Again, very heavy snow across parts of northern Indiana, northern and northeast Illinois, southern lower Michigan, northwest Ohio. And like I said, fortunately the weather was pretty calm after that, and it gave us a chance to clean up after that amazing storm.
And then we have the snowfall totals as well.
Pretty amazing. A lot of you can look in your particular area and see how much snow fell during that storm. And it wasn't just the snow, it was the drifting. Again, this is a storm where we had drifts 10, 12 feet high, and we just couldn't plow through those drifts. So we had to wait for front end loaders to come in and get that snow moved out of the way scoop by scoop so that we could get the roads open once again. And once again in this storm, we had many people that took in strangers, people along. I remember doing a story, or seeing a story on the news about I-94, and people actually going out and finding people in these cars and bringing them into their homes, sometimes for 2 and 3 days, strangers, before they could get on their way once again.
And then kind of fast forwarding a little bit to 2013.
This was a major ice storm. Now, it did not affect the Grand Rapids immediate vicinity, but boy, if you were in parts of the area from Hastings, Eaton County, off to the east toward the Thumb area, this was an amazing ice storm. It produced up to 3/4 to an inch of freezing rain. It downed a lot of trees and power lines. By the way, there were people that had their power knocked off on December 21st and 22nd with this storm that still did not have the power on January 1st. And on January 1st, the Spartans won the Rose Bowl, and they couldn't even see it. But, of course, it's more dangerous in the wintertime when we're dealing with very cold temperatures here and hypothermia, people that didn't have heat in their homes and light. This storm produced so many downed trees, and one of the hardest things for power companies to do is to deal with all of the downed tree limbs. These tree limbs are very heavy because they're coated with ice, and they would have to be moved out of the way before they could get in there and take care of the lines and get those rebuilt once again. I had an uncle who was a lineman for the power company in Illinois, so he could tell me all kinds of stories about cleaning up after storms, and he was amazing. He was not only an absolutely great electrician, he built a cottage and built it entirely himself. Wow. He did the plumbing, he did the electrical, did all of that, and my Uncle Hank. But he could tell you what it was was like to deal with an ice storm or a severe thunderstorm in the summertime, where all of a sudden you would be called in and you would be working, 80-hour weeks for 2 weeks until you got everything cleaned up and everybody back online. So this was an amazing storm. We've had a lot of ice storms. I think probably the worst ice storm ever in the state of Michigan was in 1922 across the Cadillac area, and it took them a month to get electricity back to everybody. And you can imagine that in 1922, what that must have been like.
Yeah. Well, the winter outlook here coming tomorrow at noon, Bill. What can you tell us right now before that goes live on woodtv.com?
Well, there's a lot of things we're looking at. First of all, this is a second-year La Nina. You've probably heard the terms of La Nina and El Nino before. La Nina means the little girl in Spanish. El Nino means the little boy in Spanish. And these are terms that were given to these weather patterns by meteorologists in the country of Peru and Bolivia in South America. They noticed that when the water temperatures warmed up or cooled off the coast of South America, then that changed the weather pattern for that particular area. And if they could anticipate what the water temperatures were doing, they could better forecast seasonal weather. These guys are amazing. There's a group of meteorologists in Brazil right now called Metsul, and if you ever need weather for South America, those are the people to see because they just do an amazing job. But anyhow, it wasn't until about the 1980s these concepts got organized, and we know that if we go into an La Nina pattern, that there are certain things that tend to happen here. We're in a second-year La Nina, and La Ninas are characterized by cooler than average water temperatures over the equatorial areas of the Pacific Ocean west of South America. So that's the first thing we look at, and we had a La Nina last year. So one of the first places we start for our winter forecast is what happened last year, because that could give us a clue as to what was going to happen again this year. We've also been looking at something that was developed by a friend of mine, Dr. Judah Cohen. He worked at MIT. I think he's pretty much out on his own right now. And Dr. Cohen was looking at snow cover in Siberia. And if snow cover in Siberia builds up early, that's usually an indication that we're going to have quite a slug of winter weather during the early part of winter. And I think that's going to be the case this year. If you go online and you look at snow cover in Siberia, there's a lot of it right now. Pretty much all of Siberia is snow covered. There's about a 70% correlation between that happening and the cold and snowy period in the Great Lakes during late November and December. So we do expect, we're cool this week, obviously, but we're not seeing any snow. This is very dry air here, so it's tough to get a whole lot of lake effect going in this overall dry air mass. We're going to warm up a little bit here next week relative to average, but as we get into the third and probably the fourth week of November, we're going to see winter move down into the Great Lakes. Lake Michigan is very warm out there. Water temperature is at 58 degrees out at the Mid-Lake Buoy, which is still out there. And as that really cold air comes over the warmer waters, relatively warmer waters of the lake, we expect some decent lake effect snow. Last year, we really missed out on the lake effect snow. And, last year, Chicago had above average snowfall by about 8 inches. So in Chicago, they had a pretty tough winter compared to what we had here in West Michigan. Chicago had more snow last winter than Muskegon. Can you imagine that? Very rare event.
Interesting.
Snowfall totals were much closer to normal once you got to the east part of the state, Detroit and Flint. So it was right here in West Michigan we kind of missed out on the snow. And by the way, here's another interesting fact. Despite the fact that we had lower than average snowfall totals, it was a great year for ski resorts because we didn't get a real super January thaw to warm up and melt all the snow off. They managed to keep their snow. Temperatures were cool, but not real warm, and they were able to make snow at night. If you go down to Bittersweet or talk to Canonsburg, they had good years, and I expect them to have great years this year as well. So if you're interested in getting a season ski pass this year, I think that would be a good thing to do. You should have plenty of hours to ski out there. But we're looking at winter to come a little bit earlier this year. I expect this December to be the coldest December we've had in at least 4 years, and maybe not 8, and maybe even 8 years. So there's a good chance of a white Christmas. Santa will be happy this year. I can guarantee you that. He's looking at the snow out. I think this will also be, by the way, a good year for snowfall across much of Western Europe and China. Normally when you get these troughs in the atmosphere, if there's one over the eastern United States, there's also one over Western Europe and one over China. So the population populated areas of the Earth could see some colder weather this winter, and also the possibility for some significant snow. So we're looking for a good winter here. I know winters, let me tell you something I did once. I had to introduce Amy Grant at the Van Andel. There's 10,000 people there, okay? So I go out there and I say, I've always wanted to do this in front of a big crowd. I got a big crowd here, 10,000 people. Let's see how this works. I'm going to have all of you cheer as loud as you can if you like winter and you love snow and ice and whatnot. And then I'm going to have you cheer if you hate winter. And just soon it was 70 degrees all winter. So I had everybody cheer, and then I had everybody cheer again. And the don't like winters won by just a little bit. Now keep in mind, this is an Amy Grant crowd. This might be different if you were at a Bob Seger concert. I don't know. But, Amy came out and said, what was all that cheering? And I said, Amy, they love you out here. The Grand Rapids just full of Amy Grant fans. But we had everybody cheer there, and I thought that was kind of a fun thing to do.
Nice. Bill, I appreciate it. Thank you for taking some time here to chat with us. Folks, the Winter Outlook goes live on woodtv.com tomorrow at noon. It'll be there for your viewing pleasure. This has been a look at the Wood TV Live Desk. Thanks again, and have a great afternoon.